There is an earthquake in American history so powerful that it made the church bells ring in Boston, more than 1,000 miles away from the epicenter. It threw sleeping families out of their beds in Washington, D.C. President James Madison and his wife Dolly felt the floor of the White House move under their feet. It cracked sidewalks in Charleston, South Carolina, and in the place where it actually happened, it did something so strange that for almost 200 years, scientists struggled to explain it. It made the Mississippi River, the largest river in North America, run backwards. None of this is the plot of a disaster movie. It already happened. And folks, it's going to happen again. While everybody in America keeps their eyes on the San Andreas Fault in California or on the Cascadia Subduction Zone off the Pacific Northwest, a third giant sleeps right in the middle of the country. A giant that has already destroyed a region once and that sits directly underneath millions of people who have never felt an earthquake in their entire lives. Welcome to the new Madrid Seismic Zone. Most of you watching this right now have probably never even heard the name. New Madrid. It is a small town in Missouri near the Mississippi River, population around 3,000 people. And underneath it lies one of the most dangerous geological features in the United States. A complex of buried faults that have produced some of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded in American history. Not in California, not in Alaska. Right here, in the agricultural heartland that most of you probably imagine as one of the geologically safest places on the planet. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The United States Geological Survey currently puts the probability of a magnitude 6 earthquake on this fault at 25 to 40% within the next 50 years. And almost nobody who lives on top of it knows. So let me show you what exactly we are dealing with here. To understand why this fault matters so much, we have to go back to a winter that changed the geography of an entire region. The winter of 1811 into 1812. A winter that left scars on the landscape you can still see today, more than 2 centuries later. It started in the early morning hours of December 16, 1811. Around 2:15 in the morning local time, the ground beneath southeastern Missouri began to shake with a violence that nobody alive at that time had ever experienced. The shock was massive, estimated today at somewhere between magnitude 7.2 and 7.9 on the modern moment magnitude scale. It lasted for several terrifying minutes, and then came the aftershocks. Dozens of them, hundreds eventually, going on for hours and days. But that was just the opening act, because over the following 2 months, 2 more massive earthquakes followed, each one nearly as powerful as the first. The second struck on January 23rd of 1812, around 9 in the morning, again at an estimated magnitude of around 7.5. And the third, the largest of all, hit on February 17th of 1812 at 3:45 in the morning, magnitude 7.5 to 7.7. This was the one that completely destroyed the town of New Madrid and severely damaged buildings in St. Louis, 160 miles away. Between December 1811 and March 1812, more than 2,000 earthquakes shook the central Midwest. In the small region around New Madrid itself, geologists estimate that between 6,000 and 10,000 tremors occurred in less than 4 months. Nothing comparable has ever been documented in the entire history of seismology in the eastern United States. The eyewitness accounts from settlers are among the most extraordinary documents in American history. Boatmen on the Mississippi described seeing the river churn and boil as if it were on a stove. They reported tree trunks suddenly bursting up from beneath the surface, propelled by underwater explosions of compressed sediment. They watched the riverbanks collapse in sheets, taking entire forests down with them. They saw the water itself appear to rush upstream for several hours against the natural flow, which to 19th century observers must have looked like the end of the world. We now know what was happening. One of the earthquakes ruptured a fault that physically crossed the bed of the Mississippi River 3 times. The uplift along that fault created scarps, sudden vertical cliffs underwater that acted as temporary dams. The river backed up behind them, ponded, then poured over them in temporary waterfalls. From a boat on the surface, this looked exactly like the river was flowing backwards, and in localized stretches, it actually was. Another consequence of those earthquakes is still visible from space today. a piece of land in northwestern Tennessee subsided, dropped down several feet, and the Mississippi flooded into the depression. The water never left. It became a permanent body of water called Reelfoot Lake, roughly 13,000 acres in size. You could still go there today. You can rent a boat, fish among the downed cypress trees still standing in the shallow water, and look at a lake that did not exist before the winter of 1811. And then there is the story that even today, scientists do not fully know how to handle. The story of Tecumseh's prophecy. Tecumseh was a Shawnee chief, one of the great Native American leaders of his generation, a man who spent years traveling across the eastern half of the continent, trying to unite the tribes into a confederacy against the encroachment of American settlers. His name in Shawnee meant shooting star, or he who walks across the sky. And in the autumn of 1811, a great comet had appeared over North America. It was visible to the naked eye for around 260 nights, with a tail nearly 100 million miles long. The settlers called it Tecumseh's Comet. Some Europeans called it Napoleon's Comet, because it appeared in the year Napoleon began his disastrous Russian campaign. In the late summer of 1811, Tecumseh traveled south to Alabama, to a Creek town called Tecumseh. He tried to convince the Creeks to join his confederacy. They hesitated. According to the legend, Tecumseh told the assembled crowd that he was going to return north to Detroit, and that when he arrived there, he would stamp his foot on the ground and every house in Tecumseh would fall. The Creeks counted the days they thought it would take him to reach Detroit, and on the day they had calculated for his arrival, the ground began to shake. It was the morning of December 16th, 1811, the first of the new Madrid earthquakes. Whether this is legend or whether something stranger really happened, the documented historical record is clear. The comet, the prophecy, and the earthquake all converged in a single autumn. Tecumseh's name became inseparable from the disaster, and for the native nations who watched their world torn apart in those months, both physically and politically, it became a kind of cosmic punctuation mark for the end of an era. Okay, people, this is where the science gets genuinely uncomfortable, because there is a question that almost everybody outside the geology community do not realize even exists. If California has earthquakes all the time, and the Midwest barely has any, why would a new Madrid earthquake be more dangerous than a San Andreas earthquake of the exact same magnitude? Shouldn't an active fault be more dangerous than a sleepy one? The answer is no, and the reason involves one of the most counterintuitive facts in all of structural geology. To understand why, we need to talk about the crust of the Earth, specifically about the difference between the western half of North America and the eastern half. They are, geologically speaking, two completely different beasts. The western United States is what geologists call a tectonically active region. It is full of relatively young rock, faults that move all the time, volcanic activity, hot springs, and a crust that is fragmented into many smaller pieces. The crust there is, broadly speaking, warm and fractured, with complex three-dimensional structure throughout. The eastern half of the United States is the opposite. It sits on top of what geologists call a stable continental craton. This is ancient rock, billions of years old in places, that has been locked together as a single rigid plate for an enormous span of geological time. The eastern crust is cold. It is dense. It is solid in a way that the western crust simply is not. And here's the critical point. When an earthquake releases energy into that kind of crust, the seismic waves travel much, much farther than they do in the west. How much farther? Studies by the United States Geological Survey have shown that ground motion from a given magnitude earthquake in the central and eastern United States affects an area roughly 10 to 20 times larger than the same magnitude event in California. A magnitude 7 earthquake in San Francisco might cause significant damage out to 100 miles. The same magnitude earthquake in New Madrid could cause significant damage to 1,000 miles in some directions. The shaking does not lose energy as quickly. The waves travel like a bell ringing through a solid metal frame instead of a wooden one. Think of it this way. If you drop a stone into a pool of mud, the ripples die quickly because the mud absorbs the energy. If you drop the same stone into a sheet of ice, the cracks propagate for an enormous distance because the ice is solid and brittle. The western United States is geologically more like the mud. eating the energy locally. The eastern United States is more like the ice, sending the energy outward across vast distances. And that is just half of the problem. The other half has to do with the ground itself. The new Madrid Seismic Zone sits underneath the Mississippi River Valley, buried under 100 to 200 feet of soft river sediment. This sediment is called alluvium, the kind of fine, water-saturated soil that the Mississippi has been depositing for millions of years. When seismic waves hit alluvium, something dangerous happens. The shaking gets amplified. The ground effectively turns into a giant bowl of jello for 30 seconds. Buildings sink, foundations crack, and in the worst cases, the ground itself undergoes liquefaction, where the soil temporarily loses all its strength and starts to flow like a thick liquid. Buildings tilt and disappear into it. Buried water and gas pipes tear apart underground. The 1811 earthquakes did exactly this across thousands of square miles. The evidence is still visible today. There are sand blow deposits all across the region, places where water and liquefied sand erupted from the ground to the surface during the shaking, leaving white sandy patches in the middle of dark farm fields. From the air, the affected area looks like it has been hit by a giant shotgun blast of sand and water. And that is exactly what will happen again on a much larger scale the next time the fault releases. So when you combine the two factors, the cold, rigid eastern crust that transmits energy efficiently, plus the soft alluvial soil that amplifies it locally, you get a 1-2 punch that has no equivalent in California. A new Madrid magnitude 7, by the time it reaches Memphis, will have effectively the destructive footprint of a magnitude 7.5 or even 7.8 on the west coast. Same fault, same energy release, but because of where the geology placed it, the consequences are dramatically worse. Okay, now we get to the part that frankly kept me awake for a few nights while I was preparing this video. Because once you understand the geology, the next question is, how prepared are we for what is going to happen? And the honest answer is brutal. We're not. In California, in Oregon, and Washington, decades of hard work have gone into preparing for the inevitable big earthquake. Building codes have been progressively tightened since the 1970s. Schools have been retrofitted. Highway overpasses have been reinforced. Major hospitals have been required to meet seismic safety standards. Cities like Seattle and Portland and Los Angeles have invested billions of dollars in upgrades, in early warning systems, and in public education. The work is not finished, not even close, but the awareness exists at every level of society. Californians know they live with earthquakes. They drill for them every year. Most homeowners out west carry the kind of earthquake insurance that the rest of the country has never even considered buying. In the central United States, none of that exists at meaningful scale. The federal building codes that include strong seismic provisions for the new Madrid region were only updated within the last 20 years, and they apply mostly to new construction. The existing building stock, the millions of homes, schools, churches, office buildings, hospitals, fire stations, and bridges that were built over the past century and a half, mostly was not designed to handle major earthquake shaking. Why would it have been? Most people in the region had never felt one. Take Memphis, Tennessee. It is a beautiful city, around 750,000 people in the city proper, and 1.3 million in the metro area, about 2.1 million in the wider region. It sits almost directly on top of the southern end of the new Madrid Seismic Zone. And it has, by current estimates from emergency management agencies, more than 25,000 unreinforced masonry buildings. Buildings made of bricks and mortar with no internal steel reinforcement. No seismic anchoring, nothing to keep them from collapsing when the shaking starts. These are the buildings that killed people in the Italian earthquakes of L'Aquila in 2009 and Amatrice in 2016. Buildings that look beautiful and historic from the outside and become death traps the moment serious shaking begins. The city has a retrofit program. The compliance rate is charitably about 5%. The vast majority of these structures are still standing in their original 19th and early 20th century configuration, and many of them are public buildings, including schools and police stations and fire stations, the exact buildings you would normally rely on in an emergency. Now move north to St. Louis, Missouri, around 2.8 million people in the metro area. about 120 miles from the closest part of the New Madrid Zone. Less directly at risk than Memphis, but still well within the area of severe shaking. The Gateway Arch was actually designed with significant earthquake resistance in mind, one of the engineering bright spots in the region. Most of the rest of downtown, the historic brick warehouses and old residential neighborhoods, was not. Little Rock, Arkansas, Evansville, Indiana, Paducah, Kentucky, Nashville, Tennessee, Indianapolis, Louisville, the list goes on. There are roughly 15 million people living within the zone of potentially damaging shaking, and most of them have never thought seriously about what to do when the ground starts moving. They do not carry earthquake insurance because their homeowner policies exclude it by default, and they live in homes that were never designed to flex with the shaking. And then there is the infrastructure problem, which somehow manages to be even worse than the housing problem. The New Madrid Seismic Zone sits in the absolute middle of the American supply chain. It is crossed by Interstate 40 going east-west, Interstate 55 going north-south, the main BNSF and Union Pacific freight rail lines that carry an enormous fraction of all rail freight in North America, and several of the largest natural gas and oil pipelines in the country, which run from the Gulf of Mexico north to the industrial Midwest and Northeast. If New Madrid breaks, those pipelines break. The major bridges over the Mississippi River break. The rail lines break. The interstate highway overpasses, many of them built in the 50s and 60s with no seismic design at all, break. The FEMA scenario study published in 2009 concluded that a single magnitude 7.7 event would damage or destroy roughly 15 of the major Mississippi River bridges between St. Louis and Memphis. The same study estimated that 7.2 million people would be displaced from their homes in the first 3 days. About 2 million of those would need emergency shelter. Direct economic losses across the 8 most affected states would total around $300 billion, and indirect losses through supply chain disruption could reach 2 or 3 times that figure. To put that in perspective, the entire damage from Hurricane Katrina, the most expensive natural disaster in American history at the time, came to around $125 billion. A New Madrid event would dwarf it, and it would not be a coastal event affecting one state and one major city. It would be an event affecting 8 states and tens of millions of people, plus the cascading economic damage to the entire rest of the country as the central supply chain gets shut down for weeks. Okay, let me walk you through what the FEMA and Mid-America Earthquake Center studies have modeled. Not as a horror story, but as the realistic baseline that emergency managers across 8 states are actively planning around right now. This is the scenario they take seriously. Set the scene with me. It is a Tuesday morning in February, around 2 a.m., a winter night, cold and quiet across the central United States. Most people are asleep. Then, with no warning at all, because the New Madrid Zone has no usable warning system equivalent to California's Shake Alert, the ground starts to move. In New Madrid itself, the shaking is violent beyond anything in modern American experience. Buildings collapse within seconds. The few residents who are awake are thrown to the floor. Power goes out everywhere as transformers fail and lines snap. The shaking lasts for nearly a minute, longer than almost any earthquake in California history. The seismic waves expand outward at roughly 2 miles per second through the cold cratonic crust. In Memphis, about 15 miles from the epicenter, the shaking arrives about 25 seconds after the quake begins. It hits a city that is largely asleep, in homes and apartment buildings that were never designed to withstand it. Across Memphis, the unreinforced masonry buildings start to fail. Brick facades peel off the front of buildings and fall onto sidewalks and parked cars. Chimneys topple through roofs. Older schools, fire stations, and police stations crumble. Hospital buildings, in some cases, the older wings lose entire walls. The Mississippi River bridges, many of them built decades before anyone in the region took seismic risks seriously, take catastrophic damage. At least one major bridge between Memphis and Arkansas collapses into the river. Several others become unusable. The interstate overpasses fail at dozens of points across the metro area, blocking emergency vehicle access and trapping people on the highways. And then comes the liquefaction. Along the Mississippi River banks and in the floodplain neighborhoods, the soft sediment loses its strength and starts to flow. Entire neighborhoods sink several inches into the ground. Buried gas lines tear apart and fires start to break out across the city. Buried water lines tear apart and the firefighting infrastructure becomes useless within minutes. By sunrise, dozens of fires are burning across Memphis and there is no water pressure to fight them with. Meanwhile, around 120 miles north in St. Louis, the shaking is severe but somewhat reduced. Older brick buildings collapse downtown. The historic neighborhoods take heavy damage, but the gateway arch, designed with seismic resistance in mind, sways and survives. Many of the modern downtown buildings, built after the 70s with at least some seismic consideration, hold up better than expected. The damage is bad, but not apocalyptic in the way Memphis is. In Little Rock, in Nashville, in Evansville, in Paducah, in Cape Girardeau, the same story unfolds in smaller versions. Older buildings collapse, newer buildings mostly hold. Hospitals are overwhelmed within hours. Roads are blocked by debris and by failed overpasses. Cell phone networks collapse under the load of millions of simultaneous calls. The power grid across most of the central United States, which depends on transmission lines and substations that were not designed for severe shaking, goes down across an area roughly the size of France. Across the 8 most affected areas, the FEMA model estimates around 715,000 buildings damaged or destroyed, around 2.6 million households without electric power, around 86,000 total casualties, including roughly 3,500 fatalities in the 2 a.m. scenario. These numbers go up substantially if the quake happens during business hours, when most people are inside multi-story commercial buildings. In the days that follow, the cascade gets worse. Natural gas distribution to large parts of the Midwest and Northeast is interrupted because the major north-south pipelines crossing the fault zone are severed. The interstate highway system through the region is fragmented for months. The barge traffic on the Mississippi River, which moves something like 500 million tons of freight every year, is suspended for an extended period as the major bridges and locks along the river are inspected and repaired. The economic shockwaves spread outward from the central United States to every state in the country, and from there to international markets that depend on American agriculture and industrial output. This is the realistic scenario that emergency planners are preparing for right now, not the worst case, the realistic case. And the most uncomfortable thing about all of this is that the people most likely to be affected, the people sitting on top of the fault zone, mostly have no idea this scenario exists. So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, the 1811 event was over 200 years ago. Maybe we have hundreds more years before anything happens. Maybe the fault has gone quiet. Maybe we are worrying about a low probability event that will not affect anyone alive today. And that is a reasonable question to ask. Let me give you the actual scientific answer. The United States Geological Survey, looking at the geological evidence buried in the sediments around the fault zone, has been able to reconstruct the prehistoric record of New Madrid earthquakes going back roughly 4,000 years. The technique uses something called paleoseismology, which essentially means digging trenches and analyzing the disturbed sediment layers left behind by ancient quakes, particularly the buried sand blows from old liquefaction events. By dating these deposits with carbon-14 and other techniques, scientists can build a timeline of major events. What they have found is sobering. The 1811 earthquakes were not unusual. They were part of a regular pattern. Major New Madrid sequences, events comparable to the 1811 series, appear to occur roughly every 400 to 500 years on average. The previous one, before 1811, occurred around the year 1450. Before that, around the year 900. Before that, around 2,300 years ago. The pattern is remarkably consistent. The fault releases, it quiets down for a few centuries, then it releases again. Now, between those major events, the fault does not sit completely still. It produces smaller earthquakes regularly. The Seismic Monitoring Network in the region, run by the Center for Earthquake Research and Information at the University of Memphis along with the USGS, records something like 200 small earthquakes every year on the New Madrid system. Most are below magnitude 3 and never felt by anyone. Occasionally, one is large enough to rattle dishes. Once or twice per generation, one is large enough to cause minor structural damage. And the official USGS probability estimates for damaging earthquakes in the near future are the part that gets emergency managers losing sleep. The agency estimates a 25 to 40% probability of a magnitude 6 or larger earthquake in the new Madrid Seismic Zone within the next 50 years. The probability of a true magnitude 7 repeat of 1811 is much lower, around 7 to 10% within 50 years. But 7 to 10% is not negligible. That is a 1 in 10 to 1 in 15 chance on a fault that we know has produced these events before, within a span of time that most people watching this video will live through. To put that in perspective, the odds of getting struck by lightning in your lifetime in the United States are around 1 in 15,000. The odds of a major New Madrid event in the next half century are roughly 1,000 times higher than that. And unlike lightning, which affects one person at a time, this would affect tens of millions simultaneously. There's also a real scientific debate happening right now. Some recent GPS measurements suggest that strain is not accumulating in the rock as fast as the historical record would predict, leading a few researchers to argue that the New Madrid Zone may be in a long, quiet phase. Other researchers strongly disagree, pointing to ongoing microseismic activity as evidence that strain is building at depth, even if it is invisible at the surface. The USGS has reaffirmed multiple times in the past decade that the hazard remains real and that the region should continue to prepare. The bottom line, the way the experts state it themselves, this is nobody can tell you the exact year, the exact month, or the exact day. But the fault has produced major events on roughly the same schedule for the past 4,000 years, and there is no scientific reason to believe it has stopped. The next one is coming. The question is just whether it happens during the lifetime of the people watching this video, or during the lifetime of their children, or during the lifetime of their grandchildren. So where does that leave us? I want to be clear about something. I did not make this video to scare you. I made it because the more I dug into the science, the more I realized that millions of Americans live on top of one of the most dangerous geological features in the country, and almost none of them know about it. The disconnect between what the experts know and what the public knows is frankly embarrassing. If you live anywhere in Missouri, Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, Mississippi, or Alabama, this affects you directly. If you live anywhere in the United States, this affects you indirectly, because when the Central American supply chain breaks for a few weeks, the economic effects reach every state. None of this is somebody else's problem. We are talking about an American problem, and it deserves the same level of public attention that California earthquakes have rightfully received for the past 40 years. The good news is that preparation actually works. Buildings retrofitted to modern seismic standards survive earthquakes that would destroy unreinforced ones. Families with basic emergency supplies get through the first 72 hours after a disaster in much better shape than those with none. Communities that have done emergency drills and have plans in place recover faster. Local governments that have invested in retrofitting essential buildings save lives when the inevitable happens. Nothing about this is exotic or paranoid. It is the basic level of preparation that California families have done for decades, and that Japanese families take for granted. The Midwest just needs to catch up, and that means starting with awareness. This is what this video is about, and then moving to concrete action at every level from your own household to your local government. So here is my question for you. Where do you live? Are you in one of the at-risk regions we just talked about? And whatever part of the country you call home, have you ever actually thought about what you would do the day an emergency hits your area? Drop it in the comments, especially if you live in the New Madrid Zone. I want to hear about your personal experience with the region and whether your school or workplace has ever run an earthquake drill. Honestly, the comment section on these videos tells me more about the country than the research does sometimes. If you want to keep digging into this stuff, I've put together a playlist with everything we've done on Cascadia, San Andreas, Yellowstone, and now New Madrid. It's a good rabbit hole if you've got an evening to kill. Take care of yourselves out there, folks. And if you live in the zone, maybe go check that flashlight tonight.